Hi everybody, I'm back. It's now January 17th. We left off on November 7th when I had a heart attack, and I've been off for 2 months. So now it's time to get back into our study of Exodus. If you're lost and not sure what we've studied, you need to review that. You can go onto our website and find all that information on there. It's www.ministrytoday.org. Take a time to write that down and look it up. You can also find us on YouTube. We have direct connections to YouTube from the Ministry Today website. We want to get into our study today, but first thing we want to do is review. We've been studying the book of Exodus because Exodus is the story of Moses and the people of Israel escaping from Egypt. It is a long story. It's a story that really goes from Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then continues into Joshua. But we're going to be studying this because it's an important foundational truth for the entire Bible. If you don't understand the book of Exodus and the people of Israel escaping from Egypt, you won't understand some biblical principles of your own escape from Satan's hold and the slavery to sin. So we want you to understand these things. Now, since we've been off for 2 months now, we want to go back and review a little bit. Chapter 1 of Exodus gives us the foundational view that Joseph is put into captivity in Egypt, sold by his brothers, and then he comes into great fame, interprets the dream of the Pharaoh, and he gets put second in command. And in that position, his brothers come to visit him, and they discover who he is. He invites them all to come and live there in Egypt while there's a famine going on. You remember that's a whole story, and if you don't, you can go back and review some of our lessons. Chapter 1 is foundational because he gives us the setting. There the people are now in Egypt for 430 years. Joseph is long gone. He's forgotten by the pharaohs. New pharaohs have come and gone, and now the pharaoh that's over Egypt is concerned because the population has just exploded with Jewish people. And now he's concerned that they're liable to take over and overthrow the government. So he puts them into slavery. And that's where we find the people of Israel. They are in slavery. And Pharaoh has said, we are going to now eliminate all the male children. So whenever a male is born, he is to be put to death. And so they give commands to the midwives to put them to death. Well, they didn't do a good job. They said the Hebrew women were rather frisky and had their babies before they could get there. And then we find in chapter 2, Moses, and the story of Moses begins. Moses is born. His mother puts him in the bulrushes, puts him in the little ark, and sets him off while Sister Miriam watches over him. And God leads Pharaoh's daughter to find him and adopt him, and he becomes her child for the rest of his life till he's 40 years old. We noted that Moses was trained in all the Egyptian schools of learning. He learned several languages. He knew how to read. He knew how to write. He wrote hieroglyphics. He wrote many other different types of writings in that time. He was familiar with all the arts and all of the religion and all of the intelligence of the people of Egypt. He was a very intelligent man. And he was second even to Pharaoh, for his mother, the queen, became Pharaoh herself, and he was in line to become a Pharaoh. At 40 years old, he goes to visit the Jewish people. He knew he was Jewish, so he visited the Jewish people. He saw two people beating up on a Hebrew, or try that again. He goes to visit his people in Egypt and sees that they're in slavery. And he finds a Hebrew slave being abused by an Egyptian. And the Egyptian is beating him up, and the Egyptian is punishing him. Moses steps in and beats up the Egyptian and kills him, and then buries him in the sand and thinks no one will know. Well, days later, he goes back to visit his people again, and he finds two Hebrews in a fight, and he gets in the middle of them and says, hey, why are you fighting each other? You're Jews, you're brothers. and they turn to him and say, who made you judge or ruler over us? And are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? At that point, Moses is terrified, and so he runs back to the palace, and he finds that he's in trouble because Pharaoh knows, and there's a wanted. He's put on a wanted list. So he flees. He goes to Midian, leaves Egypt, and wanders out in the wilderness and ends up by a well. And there by the well, he finds 7 ladies that are trying to draw some water, and people are persecuting them. The shepherds in the area are abusing them, and so he defends them. He's still dressed like an Egyptian, for the sisters finally go home and they tell their dad, hey, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of those mean shepherds. And he said, why didn't you invite him home? So they go back and they invite Moses to come and to live in the house and to be a part of the family with Jethro. Eventually he marries Zipporah, one of the daughters, and he has 2 children. That ends chapter 2. Chapter 3 is the passage of time of 40 years, and now 40 years later, Moses is wandering in the wilderness with his sheep, and he sees a burning bush. And at that burning bush, he steps aside to see what's going on. And God speaks to him out of the burning bush. And of course, you know the rest of that story. God introduces himself as Jehovah and says, my name is I Am, and I'm going to show you who I am. I've heard the groanings of my people, and I am choosing you to go and set them free. The rest of the chapter is about Moses' excuses and how he can't do it. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to go back to Pharaoh. He says he can't speak, and he doesn't have any talents, doesn't have anything. So after 40 years, Moses is pretty insecure, and he doesn't want to go back to Egypt. But finally, God persuades him and says, okay, your brother Aaron is a good spokesperson. He can be your mouthpiece. And yet God was angry at Moses because of this. Finally, we come to chapter 4, and Moses continues to give excuses to God, but finally says, okay, I'll go and I'll do what you want me to do. He tells Jethro he's going to leave with his wife and children, and they're going to head back to Egypt. So they start that journey. And then this weird passage shows up in chapter 4 where it says God was going to kill him at night. Evidently he got really sick and he was going to die. And Zipporah somehow perceived it was because he was not obedient to the Lord in the matter of circumcision. His son had not been circumcised. So she circumcises her son, and then takes the foreskin and throws it at Moses' feet, has a big boo-ha-ha, and ends up leaving home, going back to daddy, and Moses is left alone to continue on his journey. We end up chapter 4 with Moses encountering Aaron. And he tells him everything that God said, shows him the staff and the miraculous miracles that God's going to do through the staff and through his hand going in his side and coming out leprous. And all of that is emphasized in chapter 4. And as a matter of fact, 3 times in chapter 4, God reminds Moses not to forget to use the staff that turns into a snake, and not to forget to use the other miracle of his hand going into his cloak and coming out leprous. And so God is emphasizing, Moses, you need to do these things because I've commanded it. People are going to believe you when they see the signs and the wonders.